NABS is here to support you with your mental wellness, and that is why this week, Mental Health Awareness Week, is so important to us, and that's why we're so pleased to have Rina with us here today. Rina is an award-winning counselling psychologist. She's an expert in mental health and wellbeing. Her private consultancy offers a specialist therapeutic service, providing bespoke therapy, business consultation, corporate training, and coaching. Rina works with clients who experience common mental health concerns, including anxiety, trauma, and depression. Rina's worked with a lot of clients over the years, including celebrities, entrepreneurs, athletes, and musicians. And she's also offered consultancy and training to lots of corporate companies on areas including staff wellbeing, mental health awareness, mindfulness, and stress management. Rina has a book out, The Magic in Me, which you can pre-order on Amazon and other great book retailers. It's a self-empowerment book filled with practical activities on how to improve your relationships and self-image. We'll put the link to that in the chat box. Now, in today's talk, Rina is going to explain in very practical, easy to understand terms what anxiety looks like, the factors that can bring anxiety into your life or make it worse, and also some practical ways to deal with anxiety and just generally how to support your mental wellness. The theme of Mental Health Awareness Week is anxiety. I can't remember if I said that before, but I'm going to say that now. So this is super, super topical, and I'm really glad that we've got the chance to have this conversation. Now, we are going to take your questions today. Pop your questions in the chat box anytime from now. We're going to do our best to get them answered. Rina's going to be able to help with general questions. If there's anything really, really personal that you need help with, after this session, go to the NABS website. You'll find out how to get in touch with us for bespoke support, and we can have a confidential chat with you then. But for now, let's talk to Rina. Rina, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today? And during this Mental Health Awareness Week as well, how are you doing?
I am doing good. There have been moments of stress, but we're managing. And I think that's kind of the theme of today, isn't it? The coping rather than the cure and kind of real life. Yeah. But thanks for having me here. It's great to be here.
It is our absolute pleasure. And yes, coping and hopefully thriving when we can manage it as well. So really looking forward to doing a deep dive with you. Now, let's start with the big question. I mean, anxiety is such a big topic. And I feel like we hear more and more about it. It's really part of the conversation now, especially since the pandemic. And I know that lots of people have been contacting NABS specifically for anxiety. It's a theme that's really come through again since lockdown and beyond. So we're really zoning in on it today. But what does it actually mean? Because it's becoming one of those words that some people are using, but without us really having a common understanding of what anxiety is.
Yeah, so anxiety, if you look at the definition of anxiety in really simple terms, it's a natural reaction to something that we fear. So it can be an emotional fear or it can be physical danger. The way that our brains are hardwired, they're not really hardwired to deal with the day-to-day life that we now experience, where we're constantly overloaded, we're juggling many tasks, we might be in that state of stress. So it's linked in with that fight or flight system. So when we feel in danger, we try and protect ourselves. And the way that we kind of primitively used to do that was either to fight or to flee. And that would be a way to stay safe again. So anxiety is the part of us that tries to protect us. It looks out for danger. But as I said, because it's so primitive, it can't tell the difference between a work deadline, which might feel threatening, conflict in a relationship, or a lion walking into the room. So it's not necessarily hardwired to work for us unless we learn how to understand it a little bit better. But the thing that influences anxiety is what we perceive to be dangerous. And that's going to be linked in with our previous experiences and sometimes what we learn in terms of how to cope with situations. So I'll give you an example of these. If I've been in a relationship which has been full of conflict, I might see relationships as being a threat. If I was in a hostile work environment, when I move to a new environment, I might be more hyper aware. So even if we know it's not logically true, the anxiety mechanism can take over and sort of trigger us. So it becomes a bit like that faulty smoke alarm that's going off when the toast is burning rather than a real danger.
So would that apply, let's just say, pulling this example out of my head, I'm not really, if you had problems in social situations as a kid And then as a fully fledged adult, you still had some anxiety over, I don't know, being ostracized or having problems with other people. That anxiety is still manifesting itself, even though you experienced it when you were little, even though actually now things might be okay for you socially, but you still got to worry about it.
Yeah, if you don't update your blueprint, if you don't update the thoughts and your mindset, then you can still experience that in the now. Because the thing with anxiety is, although you might have 2 feet in the now, practically, emotionally, what happens is you go back to the past. So with anxiety, you're not really in this moment. You're either worrying about stuff that's happened or stuff that might happen. And then there's a sense of losing control. So let's say you were bullied or you had challenges within social situations. Your narrative around that might be social situations are unsafe. I'm going to feel exposed. People are going to think X, Y, and Z about me. And so even though you know that might not be true in the now, because you've been sort of pre-programmed, what the anxiety mechanism will do is look out for any red flags, and it will look for danger rather than looking for safety until you learn to kind of navigate that.
So how can anxiety manifest itself? And I'm thinking both mentally and physically.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to pay attention to both, because our body can signal that we are feeling like we are in danger. So physically, you might not have all of these symptoms. So I do encourage people, if you've experienced anxiety or you're having this conversation with someone, just think about them tuning into their body and tuning into their thoughts. So you might notice things like panic attacks, so that overwhelm, that disconnect from the here and now, your heart racing, feeling sweaty or hot or cold, so changes to sort of the temperature of your body, but also your breathing. Often the first thing to go is our breath. So you might feel shortness of breath, or that you can't get enough air in, even if you don't have a panic attack. Some people might need to go to the toilet more often. So, you might have stomach or digestive issues, or, feeling sick or a dry mouth or sweating, even getting quite flushed as well. That can be a sign of anxiety. And if I was to ask you where you feel tension in your body, most people don't tune into that until you really pay attention. So you might notice a lot of people say tension in their shoulders. And if you were to just move your shoulders now, you might say, oh yeah, there's a little bit of tension there. So just pay attention to your muscles and how your body sort of feels. But even things like your stomach flipping, or knots in your stomach, or feeling like you want to run. So just, you can tune into your body and just say, right, what happens? And for some people, they feel that anxiety goes from 0 to 100, but there's often like a bit of a build up. So there might be certain signs that come in first, and then you might hit the peak, but it will always come down. So the earlier you can start to understand what's going on with your body, the quicker you can react to it. So you've got the physical side, but alongside that, you've also got the emotional side and the thoughts. So you might become preoccupied with negative thoughts. So you might have this sense that the world is scary, or I don't know if you've ever had that feeling like something bad is going to happen, but that becomes kind of a constant state of your day-to-day life. You might be looking out for danger. So you also might be sensitive to things like noise or light. And you can see that sometimes at the end of the day, people just need to almost shut down because they're overstimulated. But this sense of feeling like something bad will happen, or feeling overwhelmed. You can also get quite tearful as well. But an interesting part of anxiety that a lot of people don't necessarily connect with it is anger or irritability. We kind of can have a lot of shame around anger or irritability, or being a little bit more snappy. But if you're in that fight place, you're probably a little bit more on edge. So it takes less to get you from 0 to 100. And just kind of general worries. So with anxiety, although we use it as a certain general term, it might be specific to certain situations. It might be a phobia, or it might be a generalized anxiety. So that's what you want to pay attention to. Is it something you're experiencing all of the time? Or are there certain triggers, so things that turn the volume up on the anxiety? So that might be people, places, time of day, driving, certain situations. So that will give you a sense of what amps up the anxiety for you and what happens in your body. Because we can get focused on like doing things, but we need to understand like what's going on behind the scenes.
There's quite a lot to unpick here.
Yeah, a lot. It's complicated,
I
right?
could ask you so many questions right now. Are you likely to have just one symptom or many symptoms at the same time? And will the anxiety only manifest when you, let's say you've got an anxiety around going to work or flying, like whatever it is, would the anxiety only manifest at the time of the thing happening, or might you also have anxiety before that?
So in answer to your first question, you probably will have more than one symptom. So you probably have something going on in your body, which you associate with an emotion, and then you'll have thoughts going on, whether you're aware of them or not. So there's quite a lot going on at the same time. And that will influence then what you do in order to try and make yourself feel better. In terms of your response to anxiety, there's usually a build-up. But there'll be a certain point where you're more attuned to the anxiety, so it's the most intense. And the build-up normally comes from sort of the thoughts that are going on in your background, the background noise in your head. So let's say if I had a fear of flying, yes, my intensity might be higher when I'm at the airport, I'm about to get into the plane, or it's about to take off, depending upon what the trigger is. But I might start thinking about that 2 weeks in advance, 3 weeks in advance, and then there's a build-up. So that is like a little bit of the snowball effect. And then when we actually feel the anxiety, it's probably the snowball at its biggest point in time.
You don't want to see me on an airplane, basically. You have just described my life.
Well, there might be some tools and techniques that you can have on an airplane next time.
I really hope that we're going to get some tools and techniques. I mean, I know we will during this call, and I can't wait. Now, we're seeing loads of anxiety with people calling NABS for help. Are you seeing a lot of anxiety amongst your clients? It seems like it's an all-time high right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there was anxiety sort of pre-COVID, but since then, there has been a definite increase. And we don't know why. It could be an increase in awareness, that people are just more aware that, there's something going on in their bodies or their minds, or it's impacting on their lives. Or it is actually an increase to, response to uncertainty, because we are creatures of habit. So when things feel uncertain, it can be very challenging for us. So I've definitely noticed that. And the thing is with therapy or with kind of the phone calls to NABS, you don't have to wait until you're at a crisis point. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, all the time, I would encourage people to sort of intervene at the earliest point. So therapy or having a conversation with a professional isn't just around solving a specific problem, but you can then preempt things that you can then put strategies into place for. So I probably get calls every day, which includes some element of anxiety and different triggers and different experiences. But I think the uncertainty around things like COVID, the cost of living crisis, it can really feel shaky, and that feels unsettling for people.
So if we think about that in really practical terms, let's say you notice that you've been feeling a bit more, I can't think of a better word, but angsty over the course of a week or two. Maybe, like you said, on edge, panicky, or frightened. That's a much better way to describe it. So you're feeling more on edge than normal, and you can't quite put a finger on it. Even though it's only a couple of weeks where you've been feeling not quite yourself, is that still a good point to reach out for help?
I would definitely say so, because I think you can learn to regulate your emotions. And so, like, this is something that I use to illustrate to people. If you think about your brain in 2 bits, when we get anxious or on edge or angsty, whatever the word is for us, what happens is we go into that fight or flight bit, that primitive bit. So it hijacks our logic. So what you'll probably find in those weeks is that it's harder to concentrate. And we've all had those moments where maybe we're staring at the screen and nothing's going in, or someone's talking to us and we just haven't heard what they've said, or we're a little bit more on autopilot, or we're just a little bit more edgy, finding it hard to remember things. And I think if we can catch it early on, you have some tools to put your logic back on. Because the more time you spend in that fight or flight phase, it's going to increase your levels of stress. And that's going to then have an impact on your longer term functioning and your relationship. So you don't have to wait until that point where everything crumbles. But I also want to challenge the notion of anxiety as well, because what I'm also finding is that some people won't identify with anxiety because they imagine an anxious person to be that person who's on a heap on the floor and not coping, curled up in a ball somewhere. But what you can also find is that you overcompensate. So you overplan, you're a little bit more rigid in your thinking, and actually you get a little bit more distressed if things don't go to plan. So you can be really what we call highly functioning and achieving a lot, but still be anxious. So I just want to throw that in there, that different people cope with anxiety in different ways. But what you'll find is even if you are sort of highly functioning, it might work for a little bit, but you can't sustain that for long periods of time. So the earlier, the better is probably what I'd say, Louise.
Sounds good, especially for our industry.
Mm.
We're working in advertising, media and marketing. It's notoriously fast paced, which can be a great thing, right? It's exciting, but it can also have its stresses. Lots of pressures from clients. If you're a manager, you've got to manage your team and manage upwards. If you're in a team, you might have the difficult dynamic with whoever you're like, there are so many things going on in this really high octane environment and loads of competing priorities. And anyone on here who's working with clients will know, what the client says, you have to go and do it. And even if that's going to cause you extra stress, you have to go and do it. So how can these factors exacerbate anxiety and stress? And in practical terms, what can you do about it?
Yeah, so in terms of what you might find is that obviously what happens is work then becomes a source of stress, which then means that it can feel unsafe. And although that might seem a little bit strange for me to say that, what we're thinking about here is emotional safety, whether it's your own sense of being able to achieve, if your self-criticism is going up, you're going to feel like you're worthless or not good enough. And that's going to influence your moods and how you engage. If there's lots of conflict in your team or competition, that's going to have an impact on how safe the team feels. So the things that you might notice are, feeling like a constant sense of pressure or dread, or this constant sense of urgency, which keeps you in that fight or flight. And then also just staying up to date with the trends and being innovative. And, I suppose this industry as well is full of probably self-criticism and feedback, which can chip away at your sense of self and self-esteem. So I know that the ideal thing would be to say, like, take breaks throughout the day, re-regulate. That's great, but often it's not a possibility. We can think about our work-life balance, and everyone on this call will probably understand a little bit around what they sort of should be doing, but the reality is a little bit different. So what I would say to people is build in very simple moments of mindfulness or moments of regrounding, because what you're doing is you're turning your logic back on. So you're not in that constant fight or flight state. So you're still using the adrenaline that you might need to get stuff done without that pushing you into the stress bit. So I've got a few ways that you might just use some tools. I would say they're not a quick fix. So please think about this as a habit or a lifestyle change. And I could probably hear people saying to me, but Rina, I don't have time. Like, don't give me stuff that I need to add into my routine or do. But you'll see as I go through these, a lot of these things will take 30 seconds. And you can tag them onto your brushing of your teeth in the morning and your bedtime routine, and then sprinkle them into your day if you need to. But this will all re-regulate your fight or flight system, turn your logic on, which actually is going to help you complete the task that you need to, because you're not going to be using like extra brain power. You'll be able to focus and problem solve. So like I said, when we feel anxious, one of the first things to go is our breath. The reason that I love square breathing is you can do it on the go. No one's going to know what you're doing, so it's not going to feel exposing, but you re-regulate your parasympathetic system, which is that stress bit. So you can look at something that's square. So we are all probably on laptops or computer screens, so we're in a square. We're on a square in Zoom, so you could do this on a call with a client, for example. You can look at your phone, you can look at your diary, anything you want. But if you think about the square, you use the shape to help you to think about the way that you're breathing. And because you're thinking about the way that you're breathing, you're using your logic. So you're not just calming your body, you're turning your logic back on, which will help you. So you would breathe in, and then your belly will be full. So you hold, you breathe out, and you hold. So breathe in and hold, breathe out and hold. And you could just do that 2 or 3 times. And you'll notice that when you're in a rhythm, that's when your logic is back on. So that probably took us 30 seconds.
Can I just say I was doing that along with you? I know I'm supposed to be like, I'm hosting an event, but actually I'm now zen, I'm calm, because that really worked.
And I think what sometimes helps is that external focus, when you can see something. So hundreds and hundreds of breathing techniques, but I think the simpler the better. Start with this, do it in the morning, even before you get into work. Just kind of do a couple of rounds and then sit down at your desk. Especially if you work from home, I think the transition into your work day and out is quite important. That's one for the breath. And then another technique is muscle relaxation. So remember, I was talking about that tension in the body. PMR is quite good, especially when you're like irritated and maybe you're a little bit agitated. It's a great way to just release some of that tension in the body. So I'll have my hands here so you can see them, but if I was sitting on a desk, I could have my hands on my legs and no one would see that I'm doing this. So what you would do is breathe in and tense, and breathe out and relax. You could just do that a couple of times. Breathe in and breathe out. If you get tension in your neck, what you would do is breathe in and breathe out. Just a couple of times. Breathe in and breathe out. If you suffer from tightness or shortness of breath, or if you have panic attacks, what you want to do is open up your chest. So you would breathe in and push out, and then relax. So you would just do that a couple of times. You could work through your body, or you could choose specific parts. But if you're at a desk, it would just look like you're stretching, but you're getting the benefits of relaxing your body. Because what we want to do with anxiety is shift from a state of stress to a state of relaxation.
Rina, when we're breathing,
yes.
Matt has messaged, thank you for your question, Matt. He wants to know if there's an optimum way to do it. Should you breathe one way through your mouth and another way through your nose, for example? And I guess the same question applies to the progressive muscle relaxation as well.
Yeah. So I would say breathe in through your nose, and then your belly will be full. So you hold that fullness, breathe out through your mouth, and then your belly will kind of go in and be empty. So you hold that emptiness. And I would do the same with the muscle relaxation. So breathe in through your nose and squeeze, breathe out and relax. And with this, what you want to try and do is isolate certain muscle groups, which will feel a little bit strange at first. But even if you tense your whole body and relax, it's still fine. If you exercise or you stretch or you do yoga or you do weights, you can also kind of use muscle relaxation with that too. So hold your stretch and then relax. So yeah, so that's the way I kind of instruct people to do it, but obviously work with your body as well.
All right, great. What's your favorite on the go action? Butterfly tapping?
So not butterfly tapping, but this is a really good one for if you're really heightened. So have you ever noticed, Louise, that sometimes people might shake their leg?
I do it.
Deep. Okay, this is a good one for you then. Okay, so this is probably it's a sign probably when you're heightened that you're going into that almost that fight or flight bit.
Yeah.
So with tapping, there's two ways to do it. One is a bit more obvious and one is a bit less obvious. So I'll show you both. But if you think about walking or running, it's one foot and the other. So often when people walk and talk, they feel more relaxed. Or if you go out for a run, you feel more relaxed, usually. But this is a great one to do if you can't get out or do any physical activity. Or if you're trying to sleep, this should put you to sleep as well. So with butterfly tapping, what you would do is cross your arms. You find a spot on your arms that feels comfortable, and then you just start tapping one side and then the other. So you can close your eyes if that helps, or keep them open, and you just get into your own rhythm. So what you'll start to find is your body will start to soothe itself, and you just pay attention to that. You probably don't want to sit in an office or in a call doing this. So the alternative would be to tap on your thighs, so on your legs. So it would just be one side and then the other. And that is really good just to help you if you're really heightened and you're just feeling a bit too overwhelmed, just to bring that down. But
how long should you do that for?
So I don't give people a time. I'd say probably at least, if I was to give you a time, probably like 30 seconds. But what I want people to do is pay attention to their body. So it shouldn't take more than like 30 seconds to a minute. And what you'll start to feel is that your body starts to calm down. You'll actually feel that sense of relief. And when you get to that point, you can then obviously stop. This actually, butterfly tapping is a technique that I also use when I do a lot of trauma work. So that's why it's really soothing. But it's obviously that way or on your legs. So I could be on a call now, tapping, you wouldn't know I'm doing it, but I'm still getting the benefits of that. So that's one to have in your toolkit. But you asked me about my favorite on the go technique, and I think it has to be color spotting. And this is a little bit of mindfulness on the go. So mindfulness is fantastic, but often people sometimes think they need 20 minutes or half an hour to get into a state of Zen. And let's face it, most of us do not have that time every day. So this is a great one that you can do by yourself, with your kids, whoever. So with color spotting, the whole point of this is to ground you and orientate you to the here and now, because mindfulness is about being like present in this moment. I remember I said that with anxiety, you're either worrying about the past or the future, you're not really here. This will just bring you back to your environment. So with color spotting, super simple. What you do is pick any color you like. You look around the space that you're in and you notice everything that has that color in it. So what you'll find is you probably notice like the big things first, and then you'll hone in on really random small details. When you're honing in on the details, that means you're more present in your environment and you're more connected. And then you turn your logic back on. So you could do this anywhere. You could do this on a plane, Louise. You could do this on a train. You could do this on a meeting, in a meeting, sorry. You could do this anywhere you like. And that's just a great way to kind of reconnect, especially if you're feeling a bit disconnected or a little bit spacey. And you could do it on a call if you're a little bit overwhelmed and just need a minute to catch yourself.
Great. I shall try this on my next flight and report back. We've had a few questions in. Thank you, everyone. Do continue to send your questions in. Got one from Anonymous. I've tried really hard to overcome anxiety in work generally, but especially around public speaking. I tried to do it often, practice a lot, I've done courses, but the panic symptoms persist no matter how much I do it. In this industry, do you think this is something I can overcome? Or is moving industry a more realistic way to manage this constant feeling?
Interesting. So moving industry would be what I would probably class as avoidance. So, there might be other opportunities, even if you move industry, where you might need to speak in public. So moving industry is always an option, but will it give you the tools to manage and overcome this and kind of take control over it? Probably not. And this is common with anxiety in general, that we kind of want to avoid situations that make us feel anxious. And that makes sense logically, but also it doesn't help us to put strategies into place to overcome it. I think it sounds like what you've done a little bit of is what we call desensitization, where you try and kind of talk through things. And I'd say be realistic. So it's not about the absence of anxiety, because you need a little bit to be able to function, but it's about being in control of the anxiety. So what I would suggest is, we're going to talk a little bit about thoughts, and I'll give you some tools for challenging any critical thoughts. But this fear of public speaking probably hasn't come from nowhere. So you want to think about what was the original trigger, what happened, what were some of the thoughts that occurred at the time, what are some of the thoughts that occur in the now. And then I would suggest also using some grounding techniques before you go into public situations. So you still want to be giving yourself opportunities to challenge, and it will be a bit of an ongoing process, but alongside practicing some of the thought challenging, which we'll speak about, and some of the grounding techniques as well. But I would say it's definitely something you can not necessarily overcome, because it's not about a cure, but something you can manage and something you can then gain more confidence in over time. Like me personally, I was very, very shy. If you would have told me that I would be speaking in public, I would have said no way. But it's a gradual process that you kind of need to take continuous action over. And then I think, you could also visualize yourself. I mean, in my therapy, I use like virtual reality, where we might put you in different situations, but you also want to pay attention to the narrative around what are the blocks in your head when it comes to presenting, what are the fears.
Well, you do talk a lot about understanding the link between feelings and thoughts and behaviours, which is something that we've touched on with that answer. I mean, it seems like an absolutely huge topic, but I know that you'll be able to break it down for us in a way that we'll be able to understand a bit better.
Yeah, so this is what we call the hot cross bun, even though it doesn't look like a hot cross bun. But this is a loop that we can apply to any pattern. So for example, if we just think about the example that we had, let's say I was about to do a presentation. I might notice a change to my physiology, so my heart racing, maybe feeling a little bit sick. I call this anxiety. Maybe that's the feeling that I attribute to it. And then the thoughts are the things that are powerful that can sway it one way or another. Because if I was to feel those feelings and say, oh, it will pass, it's a natural reaction, I'm going to do the best that I can, I'm as prepared as I can be, that will help to reduce my levels of anxiety. But if my thoughts are spiraling and I'm saying, I'm going to mess this up, I always mess this up, this happened to me the last time, I'm not going to be able to do it, everyone's going to be looking at me, they're going to think I'm X, Y, and Z, that's probably going to make me feel worse, and actually probably have an impact on the way that I respond to it or react. So I might avoid the situation, I might overplan, but if I'm sort of calmer and more relaxed and my thoughts are more neutral, I might approach it a little bit more confidently. So you might even see that in my body language, or taking a breath, or my empowered stance as I present. So often with not just anxiety, but any patterns, even if it was going to the gym or having a lifestyle change or stopping smoking or, reducing our alcohol intake, we can get really focused on the behavior, and that can create short-term changes because we can keep something up for a short period of time. But unless we work on the background noise, which is the thoughts and then the feelings associated with the thoughts, we don't necessarily get into long-term changes.
So if we're prone to negative thinking or negative self-talk, or my speciality, rumination, about stuff that has no business living in my head, but somehow it's got there and it's living rent-free.
Yeah.
What can we do to help ourselves?
Okay, so the first thing is to identify the negative thoughts. And we all have our favorites, as you said there. So there's this black and white thinking where we're really rigid and we're either this or we're that. And the thing with thoughts is we have about 100,000 thoughts a day, but 95% of those are the same thoughts that we had the day before and the day before and the day before. So we're not really aware of them. So the first step is to sort of tune into the thought. And then you want to be thinking about, what are the negative thoughts? What does that actually mean? So it might be I'm not good enough, or I'm going to fail, or something like that, or I'm in danger, or I'm unsafe, I'm going to crash, whatever it is that's kind of going on with the thoughts. If you can, you want to think about what's the I am statement here. And then this is where we do what's called kind of thought balancing or thought challenging. So often what we can do is take our thoughts to be fact. So if my thought was I'm not good enough, I'm just going to go, yeah, it's true, I'm not good enough. And then I'm going to look for all the reasons that I'm sort of not good enough. But are they really factual, or are they just an opinion or an expectation? And if you were imagining that you're presenting your thought to a judge, so Judge Rina here, and you were to say to me, this is the evidence that my thought is 100% true, you're probably going to have very limited evidence. You want to look at the evidence for the thought, but then also the evidence against the thought. Because when we're in that anxious state, our brain looks for all the red flags, but it doesn't really look for any of the green flags. And when you have negative thoughts, it doesn't mean you're a negative person. It just means that something is skewing your perception of the situation. And so what we're not trying to do is flip a negative to a positive, because you're probably not going to believe that. So if it was a presentation scenario and I said you're going to do completely fine or you're amazing, you'd probably be like, yeah, I'm not going to really believe that. It doesn't feel true. But you can at least balance it out. So, a more balanced statement might be, I feel anxious, but I'm as prepared as I can be. Or the last 3 presentations I did went relatively well. So the evidence is that this will probably go okay as well. And you start to kind of just chip away at some of the negative thoughts and even them out. But this is an ongoing process. So this is about rewiring your brain over time. So start by just checking in with your background music in your head, and then start to just, if you notice a negative thought, identify it and start to challenge it slightly. And that will help with the skew. Because actually, once you've worked through this, you're unlikely to be able to really hold on to that thought. And what we can do with thoughts sometimes, Louise, as well, is we can try and avoid them. So we don't want to feel the feels, we don't want to think the thoughts. But if we lean into them, we can get a little bit more control over them because we realize they're not 100% true.
That's really interesting. We've had quite a few questions in, which I'm going to come to now, but I want to ask you this one first, because I think what you've just said would help with this particular challenge. Anonymous says, do you have any advice for dealing with imposter syndrome at work as a result of anxiety? Just really made me think of that question when you were talking just there.
Yeah, definitely. So definitely challenge your thoughts, because it's probably something around not being good enough or social comparisons. You want to look at kind of the source and the triggers for that imposter syndrome. And it's really, really common, you know, probably more high achievers have imposter syndrome than not, because you're probably really self-critical. You probably have very unrealistic expectations of yourself, which you wouldn't have of other people. So you want to be looking at that. One of the things that I would suggest is if you can get into a habit at the end of the day or throughout the day of noticing your achievements, because you're probably doing a little bit of that too, where you're focusing on maybe something that could have gone better, and you're sort of undermining or undervaluing or invalidating your experience or the positive things. So if you can get into a habit at the end of each day of just jotting down like one thing that went well, or one positive thing, or one strength. So these might be some of the questions that could actually help with the imposter syndrome as well. And then another thing I encourage clients to do, or people to do, is to write down a positives list. And if I was to ask someone who maybe has imposter syndrome to tell me 50 things that are bad about themselves, they could probably rule that out really easily. That wouldn't take them 2 minutes. If I was to say, can you write a list of 20 things that is positive about you? That's going to take a little bit more time. And just even that experience in itself shows you where your thoughts are skewed. So start to build up your positives list and back that up with evidence. And a lot of your positives will be based on your values, which are not changeable in different circumstances. So what you're starting to do is turn down that critical voice and amp up a little bit of the self-compassion, because, you know, perfectionism is going to increase that criticism.
I think it's important to consider that this could be quite a slow process. And if you've had imposter syndrome for a while, or you've been talking to yourself very negatively for a while, you're not instantly going to switch into, oh, brilliant, I can find all these positive things about myself. So you have to allow yourself the time to build up, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing, you still might not say you're amazing or you're brilliant, but you're starting to just acknowledge something that's factual, that went well. So you can't even really challenge that yourself. And I think it's on the days where you're trying to look for that, it's good to spend that little bit of time, because, you know, like I said, most of our thoughts are unconscious, and that incorporates our beliefs, our experiences, the expectations, whether that's culturally, familial expectations, society, the industry that you work within. You know, there's lots of unrealistic expectations which we take to be fact. And even if it doesn't necessarily help to change the industry, for example, what it does is it helps you to shift your response to things. So rather than being reactive and doing more and more and more, you start to be a little bit more reflective and really hone in on what's in your control and what's not. Because probably a lot of the things that you're worrying about either haven't happened or are not in your control. All you can really take control of it is your reactions to things, your perceptions of things. And, you know, these blueprints haven't built up in the last sort of 30 days. They've built up sort of probably over a number of years.
Right, we've got another question from Anonymous. Do you know what? That answer that you gave has just made me feel even calmer. There's something in there that you said that has just made me go, ah, so thank you for that. The breathing technique question now from Anonymous. So the breathing technique helps when I'm done with work and on my way back home. But when I'm at work, my anxiety is so powerful, almost nothing helps. What do I do in a situation where I'm feeling really panicky?
Okay, so I think there's probably a build up throughout the day. So I think if you can have an opportunity, even if you need to pop to the loo for a couple of minutes, just go and do that. I think butterfly tapping or tapping on your legs could be a way to sort of regulate throughout the day. Just also think about maybe short periods of time where you can maybe have for 5 minutes some screen-free time, maybe go and make a cup of tea or coffee, do that really mindfully. So take your time, be a bit slower on that task. You want to be thinking about things within your day that you can kind of use to slow yourself down. Because if you're constantly in that reactive state, it's going to build up over the day. So yeah, whether it's doing something before you get into work, maybe a technique before you get into work, put a couple of techniques into your day, and then do something as you transition out. So I think the tapping would be a good one, even tapping on your legs, which you can do in meetings. I've had some people put like a post-it note on their laptop or their computer, which is just a bit of a reminder to kind of square breathe. Because what you want to do is sort of catch the intensity as it rises before it hits the peak. But even if it does hit the peak, it will always come down. And that's also important to remember. If you don't manage to catch the anxiety, it doesn't mean that you failed. When you start to notice the anxiety comes down, you can still do a breathing technique, or you can still use something like color spotting where you're looking outside of yourself. Another technique you can use is smell. So if you're working with your senses, smell can be a great way to shock your body into the here and now. So you could keep your favorite cologne or perfume or essential oil in your bag if you need it as a bit of a shocking moment. You can also use something like a hand cream or a hand sanitizer that smells nice. Just have that on your desk. And what you would do is just use it, mindfully kind of get back into your body, maybe use a smell as a way to remind you to take a breath at that point in time. So it's a bit of habit stacking, I would say.
We love habit stacking in NABS. So yes, get yourself a nice hand sanitizer as something I'll be taking away. The power of scent and perfume is actually, it's really discernible, isn't it? It can make a big difference, and it's quite simple to access. We've got another breathing exercise question now. There are so many different breathing exercises. What are the different benefits? How would you compare the 4-4-4 breathing to, say, the 3-6 exercise or other ones? Is there an optimal one? Are they used for different situations, or is it more personal?
I'd say it's more personal. For me, I would say if you're getting used to breathing, then the simpler the better. Because if you are anxious and you're finding it hard to breathe, and I ask you to hold your breath for 4 seconds or 6 seconds, that's going to be a very long time. So you just want to get comfortable with the notion of connecting to your breath again. So I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. I think different things will work for different people. Some people really like the counting, so you could add that onto the square breathing as well. You could count 1, 2, hold 1, 2, breathe out and hold. For others, you could even use things like colors. You could imagine a colored square. If you're more visual, you can use that technique. So I think it's very much about personal preference. But when you take sort of slower, deeper breaths, it does calm your parasympathetic system. So from a biological point of view, it reduces that fight or flight instinct and response. But there's no, from my perspective, there's no optimal breathing technique. It really, requires a little bit of playing around with to see what works.
Keep it simple and find what works for you, which kind of leads on to this question. You can find what works for you, but what about if you're helping to support someone else? Someone's message, they want advice for supporting a partner with anxiety. So how best to support a loved one?
Yeah, and I think this can apply to kind of loved ones, it can apply to kind of managers, anybody really. I think the first thing is to sort of actively listen. So how many times has someone tried to fix something for you and it's not exactly what you need? So I think, as a partner or as a colleague or as a friend, you can sort of name why you are concerned, but rather than doing that in a judgmental, accusatory way, you could do that in terms of what you've noticed. So, I've noticed you've not quite been yourself, or you've been a little bit more withdrawn, for example, and just like wondering how you are. You asked me at the beginning of the session, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And just even simple questions like that. I'd probably pick the moment as well. So, rather than having a very intense conversation straight away, it's probably worth mentally preparing that when it comes to mental health and well-being and wellness, sometimes the conversations happen over a period of time. So, you could do it on a walk and talk. You could find kind of natural moments just to discuss emotions or life in general. It could be in the car when you're driving somewhere. It might be kind of check-ins at the end of the day, like, how was your day? What went well? Was anything challenging? Anything you need from me? So you're sort of offering support. So rather than sort of telling that individual, I think it's about being proactively empathic and actively listening to what they need. I think, if any of these techniques have been useful, or there's other techniques that you've come across, you can model that. You can kind of model how you deal with your stress, or maybe make suggestions, but probably avoid using words like should. So I think you should do this, or I think you should do that, because it's a very personal thing. And you probably will get a little bit more defensiveness. If someone tells you, I think you should do this, you're probably gonna be like, no, even if you know that it's good for you. And it's just human nature, really. But it's also really important. I see this with parents and children, not to minimize emotions. So even if you can't understand the reaction, it feels very real for that individual. And when it comes to anxiety in particular, it's not a logical thing. It's an instinctual feelings-based thing. So you just want to listen. I think, you also want to think about signposting as well. So are there places that they can get support, like the NABS helpline, or a GP, or perhaps, a social media post that you think could be useful? You might share that. But this is about kind of respectful boundaries around how you have the discussion. So gently would be my approach, just to kind of let them know that you're alongside them and you're there when they're ready. I would also think about how you access your own support as a partner too, because that can be really stressful. When someone isn't, as well as you might like them to be, mentally, emotionally, physically, it can have an impact on sort of how you feel about yourself too. So if you also practice being grounded, calm and relaxed, then what you're also doing is mirroring that to that individual. So if you're relaxed, they're less likely to go into fight or flight as well. They have some safety within that relationship with you.
Okay, so that sounds really useful. And also you can always give NABS a call if you're finding it a bit challenging or worrying or upsetting. Supporting your partner or someone in your team, we can give some guidance and be a listening ear for that as well. This is an interesting one. Is it a common thing to have anxiety about experiencing anxiety, worrying that other people will notice or judge you, especially at work? If yes, how do you manage that or overcoming?
So anxiety about anxiety. So for me, how I interpret that is almost that fear of exposure. Someone's going to know. They're going to know, they're going to see, they're going to notice. And I'll probably, like, if I draw that down a little bit, why would I feel scared about being exposed? Probably because they're going to see something that I'm failing at, potentially. So maybe it comes back down to that statement of, like, I'm a failure or I'm not good enough. And how you might manage that is to sort of just start to curiously question yourself. So actually, what is the thought behind it? Going back to some of that challenging around, is it true, is it not? And if the worst case scenario were to happen and someone was to notice that you were anxious, what would actually happen? And often if we sit with the worst case scenario, it's probably not going to be as bad as we think it will be. And if you play through the worst case scenario and have a little bit of a plan, so if that were to happen, what could I do? Then you've kind of worked through the worst case scenario. But then in opposition to that, you want to look at what's the best case scenario, and then what is something that's more realistic. So I'd say sit through some of those thoughts and just figure out why it is distressing, and have a little bit of a plan if you need to, in terms of how you might respond, how you might communicate. But then also start to continue to ground yourself throughout the day as well. So if it is about the exposure, you want to kind of figure out, well, why do I feel that way? And that's where having a space to talk things through can be really useful.
It's a real theme coming through with all of this. It seems to be a mix of doing some of those physical techniques with your breathing or noticing the colours, whatever works for you. And then either having just a really kind, inquiring conversation with yourself, or seeking out a professional who can have that conversation with you.
Yeah, definitely. Because when you're in the midst of anxiety, you're kind of stuck in the loop. If you go back to that loop, you're stuck in it. And I think just having some space, even if you journal or you jot things down, or you talk things through. If you don't want to write things down, you can voice record just to say something out loud. What that helps you to do is then zoom out of it, zoom out of the situation, gain a bit of clarity, gain a bit of perspective. And there still might be things that you need to challenge or actions that you need to take. So anxiety isn't working against us, it's trying to work for us to protect us, but we don't always need protecting. So, you know, all anxiety is not irrational. Sometimes there'll be a reason for it and the stuff that you might need to do to take action to minimize that. But where it's kind of less rational, you then can put a plan into place or put it back in its box.
We've got a mindfulness question. I have great difficulty in practicing mindfulness/meditation. I've heard many times the need to notice thoughts and let them float past you like clouds. However, I cannot help but float along with them rather than be grounded. That is such a good explanation. This in itself is rather distracting. Quieting my mind is very challenging. What that person's done there is they've opened my head and scooped out my brains and shown you all the contents. That's exactly what happens to me.
And mindfulness takes many different forms. So that's probably more about like guided meditation, or you know, you could build that in later. And I think that comes back to sort of personal preference as well. But color spotting or looking at objects or coming back to your surroundings or slowing down your eating, so you're mindfully eating, all of that is mindfulness, but sort of more mindfulness on the go. And if you are an overthinker and someone's telling you not to think, you're going to think more. So you probably want to just explore that a little bit in terms of what feels relaxing. And if it doesn't feel relaxing, then don't use it as a technique. So you can use mindfulness in other ways. And that's just about what is my presence in this moment. What you could even do is, rather than going to your thoughts in your mind and noticing them on a cloud, you could just check in with your body. So you could do a bit of a body scan. So if you were to close your eyes and scan your body, where do you feel areas of tension? What's going on in your body? And just breathe into that. And maybe then ask yourself, like, what do I need to either feel safer or to feel more grounded? So you can, there's different variations of mindfulness and meditation. With meditation as well, sometimes maybe why people don't connect to it is because it's somebody else's voice, if it's a guided meditation, or it's someone else's narrative. But an alternative is safe space visualization, where you create your own safe space. So you step into a place in your mind that feels calmer and more relaxed, and you explore it with all of your senses. So sometimes having your own connection to your own story is also important.
Now we've only got 5 minutes left. We won't be 5 minutes late. And we've had a load of questions, which I'm super happy about. So can I just say now, I'm really sorry if we haven't got to your question, but you can send them through afterwards and we can help, basically. So either Dr. Rina can have a quick chat with you, or you can call NABS for a chat as well. So the support doesn't stop here. So that's it. Let's crack on. This is a good one. We don't really speak about the mental health issues that appear with the menopause, particularly anxiety and panic attacks that have appeared out of the blue with no real triggers. I've not found anything that helps yet. Have you got any suggestions?
Yeah, I think with that, there's probably two things. One is around kind of that loss of control. So maybe feeling not as in control of your body, but I think also alongside that, you have maybe a changing sense of identity as well. So I suppose when there's physical changes in our body, that can influence like how we feel about ourselves. So it's probably two things kind of going on. I'd say depending upon the impact of that, it could be worth just exploring that in a little bit more detail in terms of like some of the beliefs that you might hold, or the impact on your body as well. I think something like progressive muscle relaxation when you're coming back into your body and reconnecting could be quite useful. But I'd probably say that might be something to explore a little bit more, either through therapy or through a conversation in a little bit more detail. And there are kind of lots of resources out there. I don't know if NABS has any resources on mental health and menopause, but maybe we can share some links if that
we can definitely guide people with that if you give us a call, and then we'll be able to hold space for you and suggest some signposting as well. So lots of people who work at NABS are really into the menopause, myself included, so you're in good company. Now look, I think we're going to have room for one more question, but like I said, we're not just leaving you at the end of this. Please get in touch with us for help. I really appreciate the fact that so many of you have got in touch with your questions. I don't know how quickly you can answer this one. It's huge. When approaching social media as a freelancer, Instagram or LinkedIn are excellent tools for promoting ourselves, but I end up in a loop of anxiety and self-criticism that refrains me from posting my work, no matter how good it is. This leads to damaging my career. I know it's a comparison of myself with the others that really affects me, no matter how many awards I've won in my life. It all leads to you're a failure. How to fight this? If you can answer this in a minute, then congratulations. I don't think
Right.
Let
me. So I think first of all, you probably have to feel the fear and do it anyway. So that will be a little bit of the exposure. Maybe start, if you've got a private and a public, you could just kind of create a private one and kind of post it on there and get used to the idea of posting. I think also with a social comparison element, you need kind of social media free time. So maybe turn off notifications, think about who you're following. You want to use social media consciously. So social media is not a good or a bad thing. It's our emotional state at the time that we are using it. So there probably are times that you can use social media and not feel triggered, and other times where you will. So you want to just understand like what's the difference. Maybe look at who you're following, what content you're consuming, and if that is triggering in any way. And then think about if there's other people that you could follow just to even that up for yourself. But at some point, the only way to kind of get over that is to post and to sit with that and tolerate the anxiety a little bit more. So maybe if there are posts that are less high risk in terms of exposure, start with those and then kind of work your way up to what you really want to put out there.
That's really good advice. I am really tempted to try and squeeze in one more question. I know that it's coming to the end of lunch break and I don't want to make people late. Let's just try one more really quickly. What's your advice in communicating anxiety to colleagues who have no experience of or understanding of what it is? It's difficult to do. There's a stigma when we're revealing this to colleagues, and it can affect people's perceptions of you.
Yeah, I think you probably want to discern like who are the safer people in your team. So you probably don't need to let everybody know. Part of it would be kind of self-management, but a part of it would also be thinking about what are the opportunities to normalize talking about anxiety. So could you talk to people within HR? Are there people that you can feed back on so the organization is delivering some generalized kind of information around anxiety? So it's a bit of kind of self-responsibility, and then maybe working with the structures of the organization. For example, is there like a staff feedback survey that you can use to put your points across? But yeah, in terms of that, I think not everyone will understand it, but there will still be some allies. So maybe start by figuring out who your allies are and then thinking about how you can express what you need, but also building in those self-care moments within your day-to-day work routine.
Okay, and NABS is your ally as well. So always give us a call. My colleague Kat just popped our number in the chat box. So give us a call for more help with that. We're going to have to end it there. I feel really calm and reassured at the end of that, and I hope you all do too. Thank you so much, Rina. That was brilliant. So useful, so fascinating. And my key takeaway is that grounding yourself in gratitude at the end of the day, and then talking to yourself in a really positive, inquisitive way to find out if those negative thoughts are actually true, than just being your own cheerleader, friend and supporter. So loads of techniques there. Thank you so much, Rina, for sharing all of those. Remember to head over to Rina's website, rinabajaj.com, for more information about her services. And also remember to check out the book, The Magic in Me. And NABS are here to support you 24/7. Our website is always online, packed full of resources, and we've got a therapy referral as well if you want to talk to professionals. So do have a look at all of our contact details and resources on our website. We'd also love to know what you thought of today's talk. This QR code leads you to our feedback page. Feedback is really quick to fill out, and your feedback helps us to provide you with talks that are going to help you. So if you could spare a couple of moments to do that, that would be amazing. Until the next talk, thank you so much, Rina. Hope you enjoy the rest of Mental Health Awareness Week. Thank you so much for joining us. And to you, our lovely audience, thank you for joining us today. We will see you again very soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.